The wedding invitation fell from Jolene Crow's trembling hands like a death sentence. Elegant cream cardstock with gold embossing that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Wesley Matthews and Victoria Sterling request your presence. Her ex-fiancé. Marrying the woman he'd cheated with. You're not somebody, Jolene. His words echoed in her mind from that horrible night 6 months ago. Victoria comes from a family that matters. You're just a what, Wes? She had demanded, mascara streaming down her cheeks. A nobody. Now, standing in her cramped studio apartment above the coffee shop where she worked, Jolene crumpled the invitation in her fist. The golden couple was having their reception at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, the same place where she'd dreamed of having her own wedding someday. Her phone buzzed, a text from her sister. Did you see? Wes is all over social media. Victoria's family owns half the city. You dodged a bullet, sis. But it didn't feel like dodging anything. It felt like being shot through the heart and left to bleed out slowly, day after day, serving coffee to people who looked right through her like she was invisible. Just like Wes had said, nobody. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, what city and country are you watching from right now? I love connecting with our amazing audience from around the world. 3 days later, Dr. Edward Langford sat at his usual corner table in Crow's Cafe, scrolling through his phone with increasing irritation. His assistant had just confirmed what he'd been dreading. The annual Medical Foundation Gala was in 2 weeks, and his ex-wife would be there. Caroline had remarried last year to Marcus Blackwood, Edward's former best friend and current rival in every aspect of life. The betrayal still stung, not because he loved Caroline anymore, but because Marcus had taken everything Edward cared about. His wife, his research partner, his position on the hospital board. More coffee, Dr. Langford? He looked up to find Jolene standing beside his table, coffee pot in hand. She was different today. There was something brittle in her green eyes, a tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. Please. He studied her face as she poured. Rough morning? She let out a bitter laugh. You could say that. Found out my ex is getting married to the woman he cheated with. Apparently, I'm nobody compared to her. Edward's grip tightened on his coffee cup. The irony wasn't lost on him. I know the feeling. You? With your fancy suits and medical degree? Jolene scoffed, setting the coffee pot down harder than necessary. My ex-wife left me for my former best friend. Said I was too focused on my career to give her the social status she deserved. Edward's jaw clenched. Now they run in the same circles I do, and I have to see them everywhere. For a moment they stared at each other, two wounded souls recognizing the same pain in the other. There's a gala in 2 weeks, Edward said suddenly, his analytical mind already forming a plan. The annual Medical Foundation event. It's significant in our social circle. Sounds fancy, Jolene said, starting to turn away. Marry me. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Jolene spun around, eyes wide. Excuse me? Edward stood up, his tall frame towering over her. I need a wife for that gala. Not a girlfriend, not a date, a wife. Someone who can walk in there and make it clear that Dr. Edward Langford has moved on completely. Are you insane? Jolene whispered, glancing around the empty cafe. Probably. His gray eyes were intense, calculating. But think about it. How would your ex feel if he found out you married a successful surgeon, that nobody he discarded became Mrs. Dr. Langford? Jolene's pulse quickened. The image of Wes's shocked face flashed through her mind. Victoria's perfectly manicured hand flying to her throat in surprise. All those people who'd looked through her suddenly forced to see her. What would you get out of it? She asked carefully. Revenge, Edward said simply. The same thing you would. That evening, Edward paced his penthouse office while Jolene sat stiffly on his leather couch, still processing what she'd agreed to. This is completely crazy, she muttered for the 10th time. Crazy problems require crazy solutions. Edward pulled out a manila folder. I've had my lawyer draft a contract. This is purely business. A prenup? More than that, a complete agreement outlining the terms of our arrangement. He sat across from her, suddenly all business. The marriage lasts exactly 6 months. Long enough to make an impression, short enough to avoid complications. Jolene opened the folder, scanning the pages. You want me to move in here? We need to appear legitimate. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, will ensure you have everything you need. New wardrobe, etiquette coaching if necessary. I'm not some street urchin you picked up, Jolene interrupted sharply. Edward paused, studying her defensive posture. I didn't mean to imply. Yes, you did. She stood up abruptly. You're already thinking about how to fix me, aren't you? Make me presentable for your fancy friends? That's not what I meant. Isn't it? Jolene's eyes flashed. Let me guess. You assume I don't know which fork to use, that I'll embarrass you by saying the wrong thing? Edward felt heat rise in his cheeks. She was right, and they both knew it. I apologize. That was presumptuous. At least you're honest about being an arrogant ass. But there was less venom in her voice now, more resigned amusement. The compensation is substantial, Edward continued, pointing to a number in the contract. Enough to start over anywhere you want when this is finished. Jolene's eyes widened at the figure. It was more money than she'd ever dreamed of having. But something else caught her attention. A clause about public displays of affection as needed to maintain the illusion. What exactly does this mean? She asked, pointing to the line. Edward cleared his throat, suddenly looking uncomfortable. We'll need to appear affectionate in public, hand-holding, perhaps a kiss or two if the situation demands it. You mean act like we're actually married? Precisely. Jolene stared at him, this arrogant, impossibly handsome man who thought he could solve everything with contracts and money. But beneath his cold exterior, she'd glimpsed something else in the cafe. Pain that mirrored her own. When do we start? She heard herself asking. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparations that felt like stepping into someone else's life. Edward had been right about one thing. Jolene needed a complete makeover to fit into his world. But he surprised her by handling it with unexpected sensitivity. I don't want you to change who you are, he said, as they stood in the exclusive boutique his assistant had recommended. I want you to become the best version of yourself. Jolene emerged from the dressing room in a midnight blue dress that hugged her curves perfectly. The price tag made her dizzy, but Edward's sharp intake of breath was worth it. You look. He struggled for words, his usual clinical precision abandoning him. Expensive? She teased, turning to examine herself in the mirror. Beautiful, he said quietly. Their eyes met in the reflection, and for a moment, something shifted between them. Something that felt dangerously real. Doctor? Langford, the sales associate interrupted. Shall we have it tailored? The spell broke. Edward nodded curtly, back to business. And shoes to match, whatever she needs. But Jolene noticed how his gaze lingered on her as she walked away. That evening, they practiced their married couple routine in his living room. Edward was stiff, formal, treating it like a medical procedure. Relax, Jolene laughed, placing her hands on his shoulders. You look like you're about to perform surgery. I don't do casual physical contact, Edward admitted, his jaw tight. When's the last time you hugged someone who wasn't your mother? He thought about it seriously. I honestly can't remember. Something about his confession made Jolene's heart ache. Without overthinking it, she stepped closer and wrapped her arms around his waist. He went rigid, but didn't pull away. See? The world didn't end, she murmured against his chest. Slowly, carefully, Edward's arms came around her. She smelled like vanilla and coffee, and something uniquely her own. When had he last held someone just because they needed to be held? Better? She asked, pulling back slightly. Their faces were inches apart. Edward found himself studying the golden flecks in her green eyes, the way her lips curved slightly even when she wasn't smiling. Much better, he said, his voice rougher than intended. They were married at City Hall on a Thursday morning, with only Mrs. Chen and Edward's lawyer as witnesses. Jolene wore a simple cream dress, elegant but understated, and carried a small bouquet of white roses Edward had surprised her with. "You didn't have to," she said, touched by the gesture. "Every bride should have flowers," he replied simply. The ceremony was brief, clinical, but when Edward slipped the ring onto her finger, a stunning solitaire that caught the light perfectly, Jolene felt her breath hitch. "You may kiss the bride," the judge announced. Edward hesitated for just a moment before cupping her face gently and pressing his lips to hers. It was supposed to be for show, just part of the performance. But when their lips met, something electric passed between them. The kiss deepened instinctively, Edward's hand sliding to the nape of her neck, Jolene's fingers curling into his jacket. They broke apart breathlessly, staring at each other in surprise. "Congratulations, Dr. and Mrs. Langford," the judge said, breaking the spell. Mrs. Langford. The name sent an unexpected thrill through Jolene, even though she knew it was temporary. That evening she moved into Edward's penthouse. Her few belongings looked lost in the massive master suite, but Edward had cleared out half the walk-in closet for her new wardrobe. "The bed is large enough for both of us to maintain appropriate distance," he said stiffly, avoiding her eyes. "Right, appropriate distance." But Jolene found herself wondering what it would be like to close that distance. That first night, they lay in the king-sized bed like strangers, each clinging to their respective edges. But sometime in the early morning hours, Jolene woke to find herself curled against Edward's chest, his arm wrapped protectively around her. She should have moved away. Instead, she let herself enjoy the warmth, the security of being held. When Edward woke an hour later to find her nestled against him, he didn't move either. If you're enjoying this story, smash that like button. Every like tells me you want more emotional content like this, and it really helps the channel grow. The next few days fell into an unexpectedly comfortable routine. Edward would leave early for the hospital, but not before finding the coffee Jolene had prepared and the lunch she'd packed for him. He'd never had anyone take care of him like that before. In the evenings, they'd share dinner and practice their married couple act. But increasingly, it felt less like acting. "Tell me about your family," Edward said one night over wine. Jolene looked surprised. "That's not in the contract." "Call it research. I should know basic details about my wife's background." "My wife," Jolene repeated, testing the words. "Does it feel strange to say that?" "Stranger than I expected," Edward admitted. "But not unpleasant." She told him about growing up with a single mother, about working her way through community college before her mother got sick, and Jolene had to drop out to care for her. About meeting Wes during her mother's chemo treatments. He'd been a pharmaceutical rep visiting the hospital. "He seemed so sophisticated," she said ruefully. "I thought he was rescuing me from my small life. Instead, he was using you." "Yeah, took me 3 years to figure that out." She took a sip of wine. "What about you? Always knew you'd be a surgeon." Edward's expression grew distant. "My father was a surgeon, and his father before him. I don't think I ever considered another option." "Do you love it?" The question caught him off guard. "I'm good at it." "That's not what I asked." He was quiet for a long moment. "I used to, before it became about competition and politics and proving myself worthy of the family name." "When did it stop being about helping people?" Edward looked at her sharply. No one had ever asked him that before. "I'm not sure it ever was. For my family, medicine was always about prestige first, patients second." "That's sad," Jolene said softly. "Is it? I've built a successful career, earned respect. But are you happy?" The simple question hung between them. Edward realized he couldn't remember the last time someone had asked him about his happiness. Caroline certainly never had. "Happiness is a luxury," he said finally. "No, it's not. It's a choice." 3 days before the gala, Edward came home to find Jolene practicing her introduction in front of the bathroom mirror. "Hello, I'm Jolene Langford," she was saying to her reflection, then shaking her head. "No, that sounds too eager." "Hi, I'm Mrs. Edward Langford." God, that sounds pretentious. Edward leaned against the doorframe watching her. "Just be yourself." She jumped, not realizing he was there. "Myself got me a cheating ex and a studio apartment above a coffee shop. Myself is intelligent, compassionate, and stronger than she gives herself credit for." Jolene turned to face him, surprised by the conviction in his voice. "You think I'm intelligent? You speak 3 languages. You put yourself through college while caring for a sick parent, and you're running a business with almost no startup capital." Edward stepped closer. "Yes, I think you're intelligent. I also think you're brave." "Brave? You agreed to marry a complete stranger for revenge. That takes courage. Or insanity. Possibly both." Jolene laughed, some of her tension easing. "What about you? Having second thoughts about your fake wife?" Edward studied her face, flushed from practice, eyes bright with nervous energy, hair slightly mussed. When had she become so beautiful to him? "No second thoughts," he said quietly. The intensity in his gaze made Jolene's pulse quicken. They were standing close now, close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. "Edward," she whispered, not sure what she was asking for. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb tracing her lower lip. "We should maintain appropriate distance." But neither of them moved away. "Appropriate distance," Jolene repeated breathlessly. "It's in the contract." "Right. The contract." Edward's other hand found her waist, pulling her incrementally closer. "This is just practice." "Practice," she agreed, her hands sliding up his chest to rest on his shoulders. "For the gala. For the gala." He was leaning down, she was tilting up, the space between them disappearing. The sound of Edward's phone ringing shattered the moment. He jerked back, running a hand through his hair as he answered. "Dr. Langford." Jolene pressed her palms to her burning cheeks, trying to collect herself. What was happening to her? This was supposed to be business, revenge, nothing more. But looking at Edward as he discussed surgery schedules, seeing the way he'd looked at her moments ago, she realized their arrangement was becoming dangerously complicated. The Grand Metropolitan Hotel was a vision of elegance and excess. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across marble floors, and the city's elite mingled in designer gowns and perfectly tailored tuxedos. Jolene stood at Edward's side, her hand tucked into his elbow, and tried not to feel overwhelmed. Her midnight blue gown felt like armor, her jewelry like war paint. "Breathe," Edward murmured in her ear. "You belong here as much as anyone else." "Do I?" she whispered back. "More than most." His hand covered hers reassuringly. "Ready?" They made their entrance like conquering royalty. Edward's colleagues turned to look, their expressions ranging from curious to shocked. Several women looked Jolene up and down with undisguised envy. "Edward, darling." A woman's voice cut through the crowd, artificially bright. Jolene felt Edward tense beside her as his ex-wife Caroline approached, her arm linked with a distinguished man who could only be Marcus Blackwood. "Caroline." "Marcus." Edward's voice was coolly professional. "We heard rumors that you'd remarried, but we simply had to see for ourselves," Caroline gushed, her smile sharp as glass. She was beautiful in an ice queen way, blonde, perfectly composed, every inch the society wife. "Caroline Marcus, I'd like you to meet my wife, Jolene." "Mrs. Langford." Jolene said smoothly, extending her hand with the confidence Edward had helped her cultivate. Caroline's handshake was brief, dismissive. How lovely. And what do you do, dear? The question was designed to expose Jolene as an outsider, someone without the proper pedigree. But Edward stepped smoothly into the trap. Jolene owns several businesses, he said proudly. She's brilliant with entrepreneurship. It wasn't technically a lie. The coffee shop was a business, even if it was small. How fascinating, Marcus said, his tone suggesting it was anything but. Which industry? Hospitality, Jolene replied, without missing a beat. I believe in providing people with exactly what they need, when they need it most. Caroline's smile tightened. How service-oriented of you. The insult was subtle but clear. Before Jolene could respond, Edward's arm slipped around her waist, pulling her closer. Jolene has a gift for taking care of people, he said, his voice carrying just enough edge to make it clear he'd caught Caroline's meaning. It's one of the things I love most about her. The word love hung in the air, surprising all four of them. But Edward didn't take it back, and when Jolene looked up at him, she saw something in his eyes that made her heart race. How romantic, Caroline said coolly. Well, we should let you two get back to your evening. As they walked away, Jolene heard Caroline whisper harshly to Marcus, a coffee shop waitress. Really, Edward's standards have plummeted. Edward heard it too. His jaw clenched, and for a moment, Jolene thought he might go after them. Instead, he turned to her with fierce pride in his eyes. Dance with me, he said, leading her to the floor as the orchestra began a waltz. In his arms, swaying to the music, Jolene felt like she was floating. Other couples moved around them, but she was only aware of Edward, the warmth of his hand on her back, the way he guided her movements, the intensity in his gaze. You were perfect, he said softly. Absolutely perfect. I wanted to slap her, Jolene admitted. Edward's laugh was low, warm. So did I. But this was better. You showed them exactly who you are. Intelligent, graceful, unshakable. Is that how you see me? Among other things. His hand tightened on her waist, pulling her closer than strictly proper. Jolene, I need to tell you something. Edward! There you are! They were interrupted by Dr. Yeo, Harrison Wells, one of Edward's colleagues, who clapped him on the shoulder with drunken enthusiasm. You dark horse, Harrison laughed. Married and didn't tell any of us. She's stunning, absolutely stunning. More colleagues gathered, all wanting to meet the mysterious Mrs. Langford. Jolene found herself separated from Edward, fielding questions and compliments while he was pulled into discussions about hospital politics. She was holding her own beautifully when she heard a familiar voice that made her blood freeze. Well, well, if it isn't little Jolene Crow. She turned to find Wes standing behind her, impeccably dressed, and wearing a smug smile that made her want to throw her champagne in his face. It's Jolene Langford now, she said coolly. Wes's eyes widened with genuine surprise. You actually married him? I heard rumors, but I thought, when did this happen? Recently. She lifted her chin defiantly. I suppose congratulations are in order for you as well. I heard about your wedding. Yes, well. Wes straightened his tie, looking pleased with himself. Victoria and I are very happy. Her father's connections have been invaluable for my career. How romantic, Jolene said dryly. Wes stepped closer, lowering his voice. Come on, Jolene. We both know this is just a rebound marriage. You were devastated when I left you. This is just you trying to prove something. The only thing I'm proving is that I dodged a bullet. Really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're playing dress-up in a world you don't belong to. His voice turned cruel. How long do you think this will last? A few months? A year? Men like Dr. Langford don't stay married to women like you. The words hit harder than they should have, probably because they echoed her own fears. But before she could respond, a familiar voice cut through the conversation. "Is there a problem here?" Edward appeared at her side, his presence immediately commanding. He took in Wes's proximity to Jolene, her tense posture, and his expression grew dangerous. "Dr. Langford," Wes said, extending his hand with false bonhomie. "Wesley Matthews, I'm an old friend of your wife's." Edward ignored the offered handshake, his arm sliding possessively around Jolene's waist. "I don't believe my wife mentioned you. We were close once." Were. Edward's tone made it clear what he thought of past tense relationships. "And now you're married to someone else, I believe? Congratulations." The dismissal was polite, but absolute. Wes's face flushed, clearly not used to being dismissed so thoroughly. "Yes, well, Victoria's around here somewhere. Perhaps we'll see you both later." "Perhaps," Edward said, making it clear they wouldn't. After Wes slunk away, Edward turned to Jolene with concern. "Are you all right?" "Fine," she said quickly, but he could see the hurt in her eyes. "What did he say to you?" "Nothing I haven't thought myself." She looked up at him, vulnerable despite her brave front. "He said men like you don't stay married to women like me." Edward's jaw tightened dangerously. "Men like me? Rich, successful, from good families." She tried to pull away, but he held her firmly. "Jolene, look at me." When she reluctantly met his eyes, he continued, "I've spent my entire life around good families, and their perfectly suitable daughters. Do you know what they all have in common?" She shook her head. "They're boring, predictable. They want the same things, say the same things, care about the same meaningless status symbols." His hands came up to frame her face. "You make me laugh. You challenge me. You make me want to be a better man, not just a more successful one." "Edward." "I'm not finished." His thumbs traced her cheekbones. "You think I'm too good for you? Jolene, you're too good for me. You always have been." Before she could respond, he kissed her. Not the careful, controlled kisses they'd practiced, but something desperate and real. Around them, the gala continued, but they were lost in each other. When they finally broke apart, breathless and shaken, Edward rested his forehead against hers. "Take me home," Jolene whispered. "Gladly." The ride home was charged with tension. They sat on opposite sides of the limousine, but the space between them felt electric. Every time their eyes met, Jolene felt her pulse spike. "We should talk about what happened back there," Edward said carefully. "Which part? My ex being an ass, or you kissing me senseless in front of half the medical community?" Edward's lips quirked upward. "Both, I suppose." The kiss felt... Jolene struggled for words. "Like crossing a line we can't uncross?" "Yeah." She looked at him across the dim interior. "Did we just complicate everything?" "Probably." Edward was quiet for a moment. "Do you regret it? Do you?" I asked first. Jolene considered lying, playing it safe, maintaining the emotional distance their contract required. Instead, she chose honesty. "No, I don't regret it." Edward's response was to lean forward and tap the partition. "Could you take us home quickly, please, James?" "Of course, sir." By the time they reached the penthouse, the air between them was practically combustible. They rode the elevator in silence, hyper-aware of every breath, every small movement. Edward fumbled with his keys at the door, his usual composure cracking. When they finally got inside, they stood in the foyer, suddenly uncertain. "We should probably..." Edward began. "Yeah, we should," Jolene agreed. Neither of them moved. "The contract says..." Edward tried again. "Screw the contract," Jolene said, stepping toward him. That broke his control completely. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, backing her against the door as his mouth captured hers. This time, there was no hesitation, no holding back. Jolene's hands tangled in his hair as he kissed her neck, her shoulder, anywhere he could reach. The expensive gown was beautiful, but suddenly it was just an obstacle between them. "Are you sure?" Edward pulled back, his breathing ragged. "Because if we do this, everything changes." "Everything already changed," she whispered against his lips. "Probably weeks ago." "Jolene." Her name was a prayer, a question, a surrender all at once. "Take me to bed, Edward. Not because of some contract or fake marriage. Take me to bed because you want me." "I've wanted you since the moment you agreed to this insane plan," he admitted roughly. "Hell, I've wanted you since the first time you brought me coffee and smiled like you actually meant it." She pulled his face down to hers, pouring all her pent-up longing into the kiss. "Then stop talking and show me." Jolene woke slowly, deliciously aware of warm skin against hers, strong arms holding her close. For a moment, she just lay there, savoring the feeling of being completely cherished. Then reality crashed back. She'd slept with her fake husband. She'd fallen for a man who'd hired her to play a role, and in 4 months, their contract would expire. "Stop thinking so loudly," Edward murmured against her hair. "I can practically hear the gears turning." "We messed up," she said quietly. Edward's arms tightened around her. "Did we? The contract? Forget the contract." He tilted her chin up to look at him. "Last night wasn't about any agreement, it was about this." He gestured between them. "Whatever this is." "What is this, Edward?" He studied her face, seeing the vulnerability she was trying to hide. "I don't know. I've never felt anything like it before." "That's not exactly reassuring, isn't it?" "Jolene, I've spent my entire adult life in control, following plans, meeting expectations. You make me want to throw all of that away and just feel." She traced patterns on his chest, trying to organize her thoughts. "So what happens now? Now we see where this goes. And if it goes nowhere?" Edward was quiet for a long moment. "Would you rather we pretend last night never happened? Go back to being fake spouses playing house?" The thought of returning to careful distance, of pretending she didn't crave his touch, his laugh, the way he looked at her like she was precious, made Jolene's chest ache. "No," she admitted. "I don't want to pretend anymore." "Then we don't." Edward kissed her forehead tenderly. "We figure it out as we go." "That's very unsurgeon-like of you. Where's your detailed treatment plan? Apparently you've corrupted my methodical nature." "Good," Jolene said, snuggling closer. "I like you corrupted." The next few weeks passed in a haze of stolen moments and growing intimacy. They were no longer just playing married. They were building something real. Edward would come home from the hospital eager to hear about Jolene's day. She would wait up for him when he had late surgeries, curled on the couch with a book and coffee. But the outside world had a way of intruding. "Dr. Langford?" His assistant's voice was carefully neutral. "There's someone here to see you. Says it's personal." Edward looked up from his patient charts to find Caroline standing in his doorway, perfectly put together as always. "Caroline, what do you want?" She closed the door behind her, settling into the chair across from his desk, uninvited. "We need to talk about your little charade." "My marriage is hardly a charade." "Please, Edward, we both know what this is." Caroline's smile was sharp. "A rebound marriage to make me jealous. And I have to admit, it's working." Edward set down his pen, giving her his full attention. "Is it? Marcus and we're having problems. I think I made a mistake leaving you." "You think?" "I know I did. We were good together, Edward. We understood each other, moved in the same circles, wanted the same things." "Apparently not, since you left me for my best friend." Caroline waved that away as if it were irrelevant. "That was a mistake, but it's not too late to fix this." Your little coffee shop girl was a nice distraction, but we both know it won't last. Her name is Jolene, and she's my wife. A wife you married after knowing her for what? 2 weeks? Come on, Edward. When has there ever been passion between us? Physical attraction? The kind of desperate need that makes people do crazy things. Edward thought about the night before, Jolene laughing at something he'd said, the way she'd kissed him when he'd brought her flowers for no reason. How right it felt to fall asleep holding her. You're right, he said quietly. Caroline's face lit up triumphantly. I knew you'd see reason. There was never passion between us, never desperation or crazy need. Edward stood up, moving to the window. I settled for comfortable, and so did you, until Marcus came along and offered you something more exciting. Edward, I'm grateful you left me, Caroline. If you hadn't, I never would have realized what I was missing. What you're missing? With that little nobody. With the woman I love. The words hung in the air, shocking them both. Edward had never said them out loud before, hadn't even fully acknowledged them to himself, but saying them felt like coming home. You love her? Caroline's voice was incredulous. Completely. Desperately. The way I never loved you. Caroline stood up abruptly, her composure finally cracking. Fine. But when this whole thing falls apart, and it will, don't come crying to me. I wouldn't dream of it. After she left, Edward sat back down heavily. He loved Jolene. The realization should have terrified him, but instead, it filled him with a sense of rightness he'd never experienced before. The question was, did she love him back? Or was this still just revenge and convenience for her? If you love stories that make you feel something real, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. I post new emotional stories every week. That evening, Edward found Jolene in the kitchen, humming as she cooked dinner. The scene was so domestic, so perfectly right, that it made his chest tight with emotion. Good day, she asked, reaching up to kiss him hello. Interesting day. He wrapped his arms around her, breathing in her scent. Caroline came to see me. Jolene stiffened in his arms. Oh? Edward told her about the conversation, watching Jolene's face carefully. She thought our marriage was just elaborate revenge. Isn't it? Jolene's voice was carefully neutral. Is it? For you? She pulled away, busying herself with the stove. It started that way. And now? Jolene was quiet for a long moment, her back to him. Now I'm terrified. Of what? Of this. She gestured between them without turning around. Of feeling this much for someone who hired me to play a role. Edward moved behind her, his hand settling on her shoulders. Jolene, look at me. She turned reluctantly, and he could see the fear in her green eyes. I didn't hire you to play a role. I hired you to be my fake wife. But somewhere along the way, you became my real one. Edward, I love you. The words came easier the second time. Not the revenge, not the arrangement, not what you represent. You, the woman who hums while she cooks, who reads medical journals just to understand my day better, who makes me laugh at myself. Tears spilled down Jolene's cheeks. You can't love me. Too late, already do. But what happens when the 6 months are up? When you don't need a wife anymore? Edward cupped her face, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. Then I'll ask you to stay anyway. Not as my contractual wife, but as my real one, forever. What if I'm not enough? What if you wake up one day and realize Caroline was right, that you settled for someone beneath you? Jolene, his voice was firm, commanding. Listen to me very carefully. You are not beneath me. You are not beneath anyone. You are intelligent, brave, beautiful, and kind. You make me want to be worthy of you. I love you too, she whispered, the words tumbling out like a confession. I've been fighting it for weeks because I was so scared you'd realize your mistake. Edward's smile was radiant. The only mistake I made was waiting this long to tell you. He kissed her then, pouring all his love and certainty into it. When they broke apart, both breathless, Jolene laughed through her tears. So what now? Do we still pretend this is fake? There's nothing fake about this anymore, Edward said firmly. Tomorrow I'm calling my lawyer to tear up that contract. I want to start over. Do this right. Meaning? Meaning I want to court you properly. Take you on real dates, not business arrangements. I want to earn your love, not buy it. Jolene smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. You already have my love, but I wouldn't say no to being courted by Dr. Edward Langford. Good, because I plan to spend the rest of my life proving I deserve it. 3 weeks after their love confession, their newfound happiness was shattered by an unexpected visitor. Jolene was alone in the penthouse when the doorman called up. Mrs. Langford, there's a woman here claiming to be your sister. Should I send her up? My sister? Jolene frowned. She hadn't spoken to Emma in months, not since their mother's funeral. Yes, send her up. Emma Crow looked exactly like Jolene, but harder somehow. Sharp edges where Jolene was soft curves, calculating eyes where Jolene's were warm. She carried a thick manila envelope that made Jolene's stomach clench with unease. Hello, sis, Emma said, surveying the expensive penthouse with obvious envy. Nice place. Your little plan worked out beautifully, didn't it? Emma, what are you doing here? Can't a sister visit, especially when she wants to congratulate you on the most elaborate con I've ever seen? Emma's smile was cold, predatory. Though I have to say, I'm impressed. Dr. Edward Langford himself, caught like a fish on a hook. Jolene felt ice form in her veins. What are you talking about? Oh, come on, Jolene. Drop the innocent act. I know exactly what you did. Emma opened the manila envelope, pulling out stack after stack of printed pages. Did you really think deleting your browser history would be enough? Good thing I'm handy with data recovery software. Jolene stared at the papers Emma spread across the coffee table like evidence at a crime scene. Her heart stopped as she recognized them. Screenshots of Google searches, printed emails, cached web pages, all bearing timestamps from months before she'd ever officially met Edward. Let's see, Emma said with theatrical delight, rifling through the papers. Doctor?
Edward Langford schedule. Brooks Memorial Hospital staff directory. How to accidentally meet someone. Oh, this one's my favorite. Manhattan's most eligible bachelors under 40. Emma, you don't understand, don't I? Emma held up another sheet. Here's your search history from 6 months ago. Crow's cafe delivery routes. Hospital cafeteria contracts.
And look at this. You researched which coffee suppliers Brooks Memorial uses, then convinced your manager to switch suppliers so you could personally deliver to the hospital. Jolene's face went white. That's not what? Not evidence that you stalked your future husband for months before your chance meeting. Emma pulled out more papers. Phone records show 17 calls to Brooks Memorial's legal department. You spoke with David Martinez, Edward's lawyer, pretending to be from various service companies. Here's one where you pose as a catering coordinator to find out about his eating habits. The room spun around Jolene. Every calculated move she'd made, every carefully orchestrated coincidence was laid bare in black and white. My personal favorite, Emma continued, pulling out an email thread, is when you hacked into his calendar through his assistant's computer when you delivered coffee. That's how you knew about his ex-wife remarrying, isn't it? How you knew he'd be desperate for a companion to the gala. Stop, Jolene whispered. And the pièce de résistance, your conversation with David Martinez where you, posing as a medical supply representative, casually mentioned how convenient contract marriages were becoming among busy professionals. 3 days later, David suggested the idea to Edward. Brilliant, really. Jolene collapsed onto the sofa, staring at the mountain of evidence. How did you get all this? I'm a freelance IT forensics specialist, Jolene. Did you forget? When you disappeared after Wes broke up with you, I got worried. So I recovered your deleted files to see if you'd done something drastic. Emma's laugh was harsh. Turns out you had. Just not what I expected. What do you want? Jolene's voice was barely audible. What do I want? I want my cut. Emma leaned back, satisfied. You landed yourself a multimillionaire through months of psychological manipulation and careful planning. The least you can do is share the wealth with the sister who taught you everything you know about computers. This isn't what you think, isn't it? Let's see what Dr. Perfect would think when he discovers his beloved wife spent months stalking him, manipulating his lawyer, orchestrating their entire relationship. That every chance encounter, every coincidence that brought you together was carefully planned. Emma's eyes glittered with malice. Think he'll still believe your love is real when he finds out he was prey from day one? I did love him, Jolene said desperately. I do love him. That part wasn't fake. Oh, I believe you. That's what makes this so delicious. You actually fell for your own mark. Emma gathered the papers back up. But will he believe it? When he sees evidence that you targeted him specifically, that you researched his vulnerabilities and exploited them, that you manipulated him into proposing to you. Before Jolene could respond, they heard the sound of Edward's key in the lock. Jolene? I'm home early, his voice called out, warm with affection. Emma smiled wickedly. Showtime, unless of course you'd prefer to discuss my very reasonable financial requirements privately. How much? Jolene asked in defeat. 100,000. A small price for keeping your fairy tale intact. The door opened, and Edward walked in, his face lighting up when he saw Jolene before registering the tension in the room and the stranger beside her. I didn't realize we had company, he said carefully, noting Jolene's ashen complexion. Edward, this is my sister Emma, Jolene managed, her voice strained. Emma, my husband, Dr. Edward Langford. The famous Dr. Langford, Emma said, extending her hand with false warmth. I've heard so much about you. Though I have to say, Jolene's been quite thorough in her research. Edward's eyes sharpened at her choice of words. Research? Oh yes, she's been following your career for quite some time. Haven't you, sis? Jolene shot her sister a desperate look, but Emma was just getting started. I was just telling Jolene how impressed I am with her dedication, the way she managed to position herself perfectly to catch your attention. Quite the strategic mind, our Jolene. Edward looked between the two sisters, sensing undercurrents he didn't understand. I think I should let you two catch up privately. Actually, Emma said, clutching the manila envelope tighter, I was just leaving. Jolene and I can finish our conversation later, when she's had time to think about what we discussed. After Emma left, the silence in the penthouse was deafening. Edward could see that Jolene was trembling, her face pale with what looked like guilt. What was that about? He asked gently. Nothing important, Jolene said quickly, but she couldn't meet his eyes. Edward moved closer, concerned. Jolene, you look like you've seen a ghost. What did she want? Just family stuff. You know how sisters can be. But Edward was a surgeon, trained to notice details others missed. He'd seen the manila envelope, the way Emma had emphasized certain words, the look of devastation on Jolene's face. Research? He said quietly. What did she mean about research? Edward, please, can we just forget about this? Forget about what? Jolene, you're shaking. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop the tremors. She's going through a hard time financially. She wanted money. And you're upset because I can't help her the way she wants. Edward studied her face, seeing the truth she was trying to hide. Whatever Emma had on Jolene, it was serious enough to leave her looking utterly defeated. What does she have on you? He asked directly. Jolene's eyes flew to his, wide with panic. What do you mean? I mean, that wasn't a family visit. That was extortion. What is she threatening to reveal? Nothing. Edward, really. Jolene. His voice was firm but gentle. I know what blackmail looks like. What is she threatening to tell me? The question hung between them like a blade. Jolene stared at the man she'd come to love desperately, knowing that in a few hours, Emma would return with her evidence, knowing that their happiness was about to shatter. If I tell you something, she whispered, something that changes everything about how we met, about why I married you, will you at least listen to the whole story? Edward felt his chest tighten with dread. What are you saying? I'm saying that our marriage, it wasn't the mutual agreement you thought it was. Tears began spilling down her cheeks. You thought we both entered into this for our own reasons, that it was coincidence that brought us together. Wasn't it? No. The word came out as a broken whisper. I targeted you, Edward. For months. I researched you, manipulated circumstances to meet you, influenced your lawyer to suggest the contract marriage. You weren't making a business deal with an equal partner. You were prey. The color drained from Edward's face. What? I saw you in the cafe months before we officially met. I thought if I could get close to you, make you need me somehow, I could escape my life. Have my revenge on Wes. I planned it all. Edward stepped back as if she'd struck him. You planned all of it. The coffee deliveries to your hospital, the timing of our conversations, finding out about your ex-wife, learning about your vulnerabilities. She was sobbing now. I manipulated you into proposing to me. Everything? His voice was barely audible. Every moment, every conversation, No! Jolene stepped toward him desperately. Not everything. Not falling in love with you. That was real, Edward. That was the one thing I never planned for. But Edward was backing away, his expression shifting from hurt to something close to disgust. How am I supposed to believe anything you say now? Because you know me? I don't know you at all, apparently. His voice was cold, clinical. I thought Caroline was manipulative, but she was an amateur compared to you. Edward, please. How long were you watching me before we met? Jolene closed her eyes in defeat. 6 months. 6 months. He laughed bitterly. 6 months of being studied like a lab rat, having my weaknesses cataloged, my routines memorized. Did you enjoy it? Playing with your prey? It wasn't like that. Wasn't it? You researched my vulnerabilities and exploited them. You manipulated my own lawyer into giving me the idea that saved you from having to actually seduce me yourself. Edward's hands clenched into fists. You turned me into a mark in my own proposal. I fell in love with you, Jolene cried desperately. Everything I felt, everything we shared, that was real. How convenient that you fell in love after you had me trapped. That's not fair. Fair? Edward's voice rose for the first time. You think fairness comes into this? You stalked me for months, manipulated me into marriage, and now you want credit for developing genuine feelings for your victim. The word, victim, hung in the air between them like a slap. Jolene saw the moment Edward's walls slammed back up, saw the man she loved disappear behind the cold stranger he'd been before they met. Get out, he said quietly. Edward. I said get out. I need you gone before I do something I'll regret. This is my home too. This was never your home. It was just another part of your con. Jolene stood there for a moment longer, memorizing his face, knowing she might never see love in his eyes again. Then she gathered what dignity she had left and walked toward their bedroom to pack. Jolene, Edward called after her, his voice hollow. She turned hopefully. Leave the ring. Edward stood alone in his living room, staring at the space where Jolene had been just minutes before. The silence felt different now, not peaceful but empty, violated. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Dr. Langford, this is Emma Crow. I think we should talk. I have something you need to see." An hour later, Emma sat across from Edward in his office, the manila envelope spread between them like a cancer. "I want you to know, I take no pleasure in this," Emma said, though her satisfied expression suggested otherwise. "But you deserve to know the truth." Edward stared at the evidence of his manipulation with clinical detachment. Each printed page was another nail in the coffin of what he'd thought was love. "She researched my eating habits," he said flatly, holding up a phone record. "Called your office 17 times under different pretenses. She knew your schedule better than your assistant did." Edward found a cached web page showing his biography from the hospital website, annotated in Jolene's handwriting with notes about his family background, education, even his parents' divorce. "She studied me like a dissertation subject. The timing of everything makes sense now, doesn't it?" Emma pointed to a timeline she'd created. "She broke up with Wes in March, started researching you in April. By June, she'd engineered the coffee delivery contract. July, she'd identified your lawyer and begun her manipulation campaign. August, she finally made her move. 5 months of planning," Edward said hollowly. "She's always been brilliant with people, reading what they need, becoming what they want. Our mother used to say Jolene could charm her way out of anything." Edward looked up sharply. "Your mother? Terminal cancer. Jolene spent her life savings trying experimental treatments that didn't work. Mom died anyway, leaving Jolene broke and desperate." Emma shrugged. "Not that it excuses what she did to you. Why are you showing me this?" "Because you're a good man, and you deserved better than being someone's escape plan." Edward was quiet for a long moment, processing not just the betrayal, but the skill behind it. "She's brilliant," he said finally. "What?" "This level of psychological manipulation, strategic planning, execution." He gestured to the evidence. "It's actually impressive. She identified a target, researched weaknesses, created multiple contingency plans, and executed flawlessly. You sound almost admiring." "Professionally, I am. Personally," Edward's jaw tightened, "I feel like the biggest fool who ever lived. What will you do now?" Edward gathered the papers, his movements sharp with controlled anger. "Now I protect myself from further manipulation. File for divorce, division of assets, restraining order if necessary." "She really did seem to love you, you know. These last few weeks especially." Edward's laugh was bitter. "Stockholm Syndrome. She spent so long pretending to care about me that she convinced herself it was real. Maybe. Or maybe falling in love with your Mark wasn't part of her plan. It doesn't matter now, does it?" Edward stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. "The foundation of our entire relationship is a lie. Everything she knows about me was acquired through deception. Every intimate moment was built on manipulation." After Emma left, Edward sat alone with the evidence of his humiliation. His phone showed 17 missed calls from Jolene, but he deleted them without listening to the voicemails. She'd played him perfectly, identified his loneliness, his need to prove himself superior to Marcus and Caroline, his desire for genuine connection. She'd become exactly what he needed when he needed it. The woman he'd fallen in love with had never existed. She was just a character Jolene had created to trap him. 2 weeks later, Jolene sat in her lawyer's office, pale and exhausted from sleepless nights spent trying to figure out how to salvage her marriage. "Mrs. Langford, I have to be honest," her attorney said gently. "Your husband's legal team is aggressive. They're pushing for fraud charges." "Fraud?" "Conspiracy to commit marriage fraud, identity deception, manipulation of legal counsel." The lawyer consulted his notes. "They're claiming you entered the marriage under false pretenses with intent to defraud. But I never took any money from him. I never accessed his accounts, never. You received substantial benefits. Housing, clothing, jewelry, lifestyle improvements. From a legal standpoint, that constitutes financial gain through deception. Jolene closed her eyes, feeling the walls closing in. What are my options? Honestly, accept whatever settlement they offer and hope they don't press charges. Your husband has significant resources and excellent legal representation. Fighting this could result in criminal prosecution. I need to talk to him. If I could just explain, Mrs. Langford, my professional advice is to stay as far away from your husband as possible. Any contact could be construed as continued harassment or manipulation. That evening, Jolene sat in her old studio apartment above the cafe, the same space she'd left months ago, full of hope for revenge. Now she was back where she'd started, only worse. She'd lost Edward, lost her home, and potentially faced legal consequences for her actions. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Heard about the divorce proceedings. Maybe now you'll appreciate my very reasonable offer. The price has gone up, $150,000. Jolene stared at the message in disbelief. Emma wasn't done bleeding her dry. A knock at her door made her jump. For a moment, hope flared. Maybe Edward had come to talk, to listen to her side. Instead, she opened the door to find Caroline Blackwood, perfectly coiffed and radiating triumph. "Well, well," Caroline said, pushing past Jolene into the small apartment. "How the mighty have fallen." "What do you want, Caroline?" "To thank you, actually. Your little deception accomplished something I never could. It showed Edward exactly what happens when he tries to replace me with someone unsuitable. Get out. In a moment. First, I want you to know that Edward and I had lunch yesterday. He's finally realized what a mistake it was to try to move on from someone of his own class." Jolene felt like she'd been punched. "You're lying." "Am I? He told me all about your elaborate con, how you stalked him, manipulated him, played him like a violin." Caroline's smile was vicious. "He's actually grateful I left him when I did. Grateful he learned what real manipulation looks like before it was too late." "He wouldn't—" "He's hurt, Jolene. Devastated that someone could play such a cruel game with his emotions. He needs someone who understands his world, someone genuine." Caroline smoothed her already perfect hair. "Someone like me. You're just as manipulative as you claim I am. The difference is, I've never pretended to be anything other than what I am. I never stalked him or tricked him into loving a fictional version of myself." Caroline moved toward the door. "Enjoy your little apartment, dear. It's probably the best you'll ever do now." After Caroline left, Jolene sank to the floor and finally allowed herself to break completely. She'd destroyed the best thing that had ever happened to her, and now even the wreckage was being picked clean by vultures. Marcus Blackwood found Edward at their old college bar, 3 drinks deep and staring at his phone like it had personally betrayed him. "You look like hell," Marcus said, sliding into the opposite booth. "Shouldn't you be with your wife?" Edward didn't look up. "Caroline's at her book club. Besides, she's not why I'm here." "Then why are you here?" Marcus signaled the bartender for 2 more drinks. "Because I heard about your divorce, and I know Caroline's been sniffing around you again. Caroline has nothing to do with this." "Doesn't she?" Marcus leaned forward. "Edward, we need to talk about your wife. Ex-wife, soon-to-be ex-wife. Jolene, I need to tell you something Caroline told me." Edward finally looked up, his eyes bloodshot but sharp. "I'm not interested in gossip. This isn't gossip. It's the truth Caroline's been hiding from you." Marcus took a deep breath. "She orchestrated everything." "What are you talking about?" "The sister, Emma. Caroline found her, paid her to dig up dirt on Jolene and use it against her." Edward went very still. "That's impossible." "Is it? Think about it, Edward. How did Emma know exactly when to show up? How did she have such detailed evidence prepared? How did she know you'd be home that specific day? She's Jolene's sister, who hadn't spoken to Jolene in months, who suddenly appeared with forensic evidence the day after Caroline had lunch with you and you rejected her advances. Edward's mind raced back to that conversation, to Caroline's fury when he'd told her he loved Jolene, to the timing of Emma's visit. Caroline hired a private investigator to dig up information on Jolene months ago, Marcus continued. When she found out about the research, the planning, she saw her opportunity. She paid Emma to present it in the most damaging way possible. Why are you telling me this? Marcus looked uncomfortable. Because Caroline's been bragging about it, about how she manipulated the situation to break you two up, about how she's going to comfort you through your divorce and win you back. And you let her. I've been trying to get evidence. Caroline's not just manipulative, Edward. She's cruel. She destroyed your marriage for sport. Edward felt like he was drowning. But the evidence was real. Jolene really did research me, really did manipulate our meeting. Yes. But context matters, doesn't it? Caroline made sure you saw it in the worst possible light, without understanding why Jolene did it, or how she felt about it. She stalked me for months. She researched you. There's a difference. Marcus pulled out his phone, showing Edward a series of text messages. Caroline's been documenting her victory. Look at this one. Edward read the message Caroline had sent to a friend. Poor Edward finally saw his little barista for what she really was. Amazing how much more sinister innocent research looks when presented properly. He'll come crawling back to me within the month. She planned this, Edward said slowly. She planned this. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Edward stared at the phone, pieces clicking into place. Emma's theatrical timing, her prepared evidence, the way she'd presented everything in the most damaging light possible. Does Jolene know about Caroline's involvement? I doubt it. Emma probably told her she was acting alone. Edward was quiet for a long moment. I need to think. Edward, whatever Jolene did wrong, she doesn't deserve what Caroline's doing to both of you. After Marcus left, Edward sat alone with his whiskey and his guilt. He'd been so focused on the betrayal, on being manipulated, that he'd never questioned how the information had come to light. Caroline had played them both, used his pain and Jolene's guilt to destroy something real. But that didn't change the fundamental facts. Jolene had targeted him, planned their entire relationship, manipulated him into proposing. Even if Caroline had weaponized that information, the information itself was true. The question was, did intent at the beginning matter if the love at the end was real? Edward found Jolene at the cafe at closing time, mopping floors with mechanical precision. She looked thinner, older, like someone who hadn't been sleeping or eating properly. She looked up when the bell chimed, and her face went through a series of emotions: hope, fear, resignation. Edward, what are you doing here? We need to talk. My lawyer said I shouldn't. I'm not here as your husband's legal opponent. I'm here as someone who needs to understand. Jolene set down the mop, wiping her hands on her apron. Understand what? You've seen the evidence. You know what I did. I know what Caroline wanted me to see. That got her attention. Caroline? She orchestrated Emma's visit, paid her to present the information in the most damaging way possible. Jolene sank onto one of the cafe stools. Caroline did this. She's been planning to break us up since the gala. Emma was just her weapon. But the evidence was real, Jolene said quietly. I really did all those things. Yes, you did. Edward moved closer but maintained distance. The question is why. You know why. I wanted revenge on Wes. I wanted a better life. Is that all? Jolene looked up at him, confused by his tone. What do you mean? I mean, I've spent 2 weeks thinking about this. About you. About us. Edward leaned against the counter. You researched me for months, yes, but researching someone and stalking them are different things. Edward, let me finish. You found out my schedule, my preferences, my vulnerabilities. You positioned yourself to meet me and manipulated circumstances to make me need you." He paused. "But you never invaded my privacy, never broke into my home, never accessed my personal accounts, never did anything that crossed legal boundaries. I manipulated your lawyer. You had a conversation with him where you mentioned contract marriages. He made his own decision to suggest it to me." Edward studied her face. "That's not manipulation, Jolene. That's influence. And there's a difference. Why does the difference matter? Because intent matters. Method matters." Edward moved closer. "You could have seduced me directly. Could have fabricated a crisis that made me rescue you. Could have pretended to be someone completely different. What did I do instead? You became the best version of yourself. You worked to deserve my attention rather than demanding it. You made yourself genuinely useful in my life rather than creating fake emergencies." Jolene stared at him. "You're defending what I did?" "I'm trying to understand it. Because the woman who planned our meeting with such care, that's not a predator, Jolene. That's someone who was afraid of being rejected for who she really was." Tears began spilling down her cheeks. "I was terrified you'd never notice me otherwise. So you made yourself impossible to ignore. I made myself perfect for you." "No." Edward's voice was firm. "You made yourself the best version of who you already were. That's why I fell in love with you. Not because you were playing a character, but because you were trying so hard to be worthy of love." "Edward, I'm not saying what you did was right. The deception, the manipulation of circumstances, it was wrong. But it wasn't evil. It was desperate." Jolene wiped her eyes with shaking hands. "Does that make a difference?" "It makes all the difference in the world." Edward reached for her hands, relieved when she didn't pull away. "Jolene, I've been thinking about something. When you fell in love with me, when did it happen?" "I don't know. Gradually, then all at once." "Was it because of my money? My status?" "No. It was because you were kind to your housekeeper. Because you stayed late to check on difficult patients. Because you talked to me like I mattered. Those weren't things you could have researched. No, those were just you." Edward squeezed her hands gently. "So you fell in love with me despite your plan, not because of it." "Yes. And I fell in love with you because of who you are when you're not trying to impress anyone. When you're just Jolene, humming in the kitchen, reading medical journals to understand my day, challenging me to be better." "Edward, what are you saying?" "I'm saying Caroline was right about one thing. Our beginning was based on deception. But she was wrong about what that means for our future." Hope flickered in Jolene's eyes for the first time in weeks. "What does it mean?" "It means we have a choice. We can let the past define us, or we can decide to start over. Really start over, with complete honesty this time." "You'd want that? After everything?" Edward cupped her face in his hands. "Jolene, I've spent 2 weeks trying to hate you. I can't, even knowing what you did, even feeling betrayed and manipulated. I still love you." "I love you too," she whispered. "I know you have no reason to believe me." "I have every reason to believe you. Because loving me was never part of your plan. If this was still a con, you would have taken the settlement money and disappeared. Instead, you're here, working in a cafe, facing potential criminal charges, refusing to give up. So what happens now? Now we start over, for real this time. No contracts, no arrangements, no hidden agendas. Just two people who fell in love despite themselves." Edward leaned down and kissed her then, soft and careful and full of promise. When they broke apart, both of them were crying. "There's something else," Edward said. "Caroline's been bragging about breaking us up. I think it's time she faced some consequences for her manipulation." "What do you mean?" I mean, she hired someone to blackmail you. That's illegal, and I have evidence. Jolene looked uncertain. Edward, I don't want revenge anymore. I just want us. This isn't revenge. This is justice. She destroyed our marriage for sport. She needs to be held accountable. What about Emma? Emma was paid to hurt you. That makes her Caroline's victim too, in a way. Edward straightened, his expression growing determined. But Caroline planned this entire thing to manipulate both of us. She's going to learn that actions have consequences. 6 months later, Edward and Jolene renewed their vows in a small ceremony at the same courthouse where they'd first been married. This time, there were no contracts, no hidden agendas, no ulterior motives. Just love. Caroline had been charged with conspiracy and harassment after Marcus provided evidence of her scheme. Emma had agreed to testify in exchange for immunity, finally free from her sister's financial threats. Any regrets? Edward asked as they swayed together at their small reception, surrounded by friends who knew their whole story. About the deception? Yes. About the lies? Yes. Jolene looked up at him with clear eyes. About fighting for you? Never. Good, because I plan to spend the rest of our lives proving that some things are worth the fight. Even when they start with lies? Especially then. It means, when we choose truth, we really mean it. As they danced, Jolene caught sight of Wes across the room. He'd married Victoria, but they both looked miserable, trapped in their loveless arrangement. He looks like he got exactly what he deserved, Edward murmured, following her gaze. We all did, Jolene replied, pulling her husband closer. I got the man I love. You got someone who chooses you every day. And they got each other. Harsh, Mrs. Langford. Honest, Dr. Langford. I don't do deception anymore, remember? Edward spun her around, laughing at her sass. I love your honesty. Even when it's inconvenient. Especially then. And as they kissed under the stars, both of them knew that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the ugliest truths. What matters isn't how you start. It's how you choose to continue. What did you think of Edward and Jolene's complicated beginning? Can love built on deception ever become real? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will keep you guessing until the very end.